What's gaming, gamers? Today I've got a really fun Prismatic Hunter build for you. This build can clear entire groups of adds instantly with the press of a button, deals decent boss damage despite not even being a boss damage centric build, and is just fun to use. Furthermore, it's not a Prismatic Titan build, meaning you don't even have to use Consecration. But before I get into the video itself, I'd like to shout out our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs. If you're looking for people to play any content in Destiny with, ranging from ritual playlist and seasonal activities all the way to raids and Grandmaster strikes, feel free to join the Discord server. We welcome anyone, no matter how new or seasoned you are, and all of us will teach encounters if you don't know something. If you're interested, hop into the Discord server and play some Destiny with us. The link is in the description. Now for the build itself, I'll start with a prescriptive build guide in case that's what you're looking for. Once I've done that, I'll go into detail about what each element of the build does, why I've chosen them, as well as any alternative options and their pros and cons should there be any. First, use the Gifted Conviction exotic chest piece. For the Prismatic subclass, use the Golden Gun Marksman Super, the Marksman's Dodge, whichever jump you prefer, the Withering Blade Melee, the Grapple Grenade, the Ascension Aspect, the Gunpowder Gamble Aspect, Facet of Awakening, Facet of Balance, Facet of Courage, Facet of Hope, Facet of Mending, and Facet of Purpose. For the Episode Revenant artifact, use the Trace Evidence mod, the Concussive Reload mod, the Conductive Cosmic Crystal mod, and the Kinetic Impacts mod. For the Episode Revenant Volatile Tonic to consume, use either the Diluted or Refined Tonic of Amplified Arc. For armor stat distribution, I have 51 mobility, 100 resilience, 30 recovery, 90 discipline, 32 intellect, and 91 strength. For the armor's mod setup, on your helmet run 1 Arc Siphon mod and 1 Ashes to Assets mod. On your arms, run 2 Firepower mods. On your chest piece, run 1 Arc, 1 Solar, and 1 Void Resistance mod. On your legs, run 2 Arc Weapon Surge mods and 1 Recuperation mod. On your cloak, run 2 Time Dilation mods. For weapons, in the Kinetic slot, use the Witherhoard Kinetic Exotic Grenade Launcher. In the Energy slot, use the Vantage Point Arc Pulse Rifle from Episode Revenant with the perk combination of Eddy Current and Jolting Feedback. In the Heavy slot, use the Bittersweet Arc Grenade Launcher from Episode Revenant with the perk combination of Bait and Switch and Envious Arsenal. With the prescriptive build setup now detailed, I'll get into describing the entire build, starting with the Gifted Conviction exotic chest piece. Gifted Conviction has the exotic perk The Gift of Certainty, which will cause the activation of either the Ascension or Tempest Strike aspects to release 3 tracking arc explosives forward. These explosives will deal damage to any enemy they hit on top of applying the Jolt debuff to them. Furthermore, applying the Jolt debuff to any enemy within 15 meters of you will grant you a stack of the Resist buff for 10 seconds up to a maximum of 4 stacks. Applying Jolt to nearby enemies while you have stacks of the Resist buff will increase your stack count as well as refreshing its duration to 10 seconds. Jolting an enemy while you have no stacks of the Resist buff will grant you 2 stacks of the Resist buff for a 25% resistance. A second enemy will increase your stack counter to 3, simultaneously increasing your resistance to 40%, and jolting a third enemy within 15 meters of you will grant you the 4th stack of Resist, increasing your resistance to 50% while the buff is active. Gifted Conviction will be both this build's main source of ad clearing with the arc explosives it creates, as well as one of its main sources of damage resistance in the Resist buff. This build has a couple of ways of jolting enemies: Gifted Conviction itself, arc weapons, and the Ascension aspect. As you'll have high jolt uptime, you'll similarly have high uptime on the Resist buff, letting you tank more damage for longer periods of time. Now that you know what Gifted Conviction does, I'll get into describing the subclasses set up for this build, starting with the Golden Gun Marksman Super. Golden Gun Marksman will allow you to summon a flaming pistol that will last for 12 seconds or for 3 shots, whichever comes first. Damaging an enemy with precision damage with your Golden Gun will grant you 1 stack of the Line 'em Up buff, which will increase the damage of your next precision Golden Gun shot. The first stack of Line 'em Up will apply a 45.8% damage boost to your second precision hit, and the second stack of Line 'em Up will apply a 90% damage boost to your third precision hit. Furthermore, after having hit a precision shot with the Golden Gun, your super's energy will drain slower, granting you more time to line up the subsequent shots to ensure their precision. Golden Gun Marksman is brought exclusively for the fact that it's a solar super and will interact with the Facet of Purpose fragment to grant you the Restoration ×1 buff. It's a decent super on its own for damage, but the Restoration buff is the main reason Golden Gun is chosen over the other supers. For your dodge, the Marksman's Dodge will cause you to perform an evasive maneuver, removing all enemy weapon tracking on you for the dodge's duration. Furthermore, the weapon you currently have readied will have its magazine fully reloaded from reserves. Marksman's Dodge is chosen exclusively for its 29-second base cooldown and nothing more. As the Ascension aspect consumes a class ability charge when it's used, shorter dodge cooldowns correspond to more Ascension uptime, and by extension, uptime for the whole build's combat loot. Onto the melee ability, the Withering Blade melee will allow you to quickly throw a Stasis Shuriken at enemies, which can ricochet up to 3 times off of enemies and surfaces. The shuriken will also track to enemies within 12 meters of the location it ricochets. When Withering Blade strikes an enemy, the shuriken itself will damage them, along with applying 60 slow stacks to them for 3.5 seconds. Withering Blade applying slow will help with the damage output of most of your abilities as well as your weapons. Enemies afflicted with slow will have damage dealt to them by Solar, Arc, and Void abilities increased thanks to Facet of Courage, and your Arc and Void abilities will have their damage increased further along with your Dark Aether Reaper weapons thanks to the Conductive Cosmic Crystal Artifact mod. Furthermore, Withering Blade has 2 charges, meaning if you have both charges active, you can effectively apply slow to an enemy for a total of 7 seconds. For your grenade, the Grapple Grenade will allow you to weave a grappling hook out of strand matter, hooking enemies or the air. While grappling, you'll be able to use a special Grapple Melee ability. This Grapple Melee will deal damage to the enemy hit, as well as enemies within a 4-meter cone in front of you when you impact an enemy. Every enemy damaged by the Grapple Grenade will be pushed back and will have the Unravel debuff applied to them, dealing damage to them over time. The Grapple Grenade is chosen as it'll allow you to both close the distance to enemies or increase your distance from enemies quickly, which can help your survivability and add clearing potential. Furthermore, the Grapple Grenade recharges very quickly and will grant a large amount of Darkness Transcendence energy with the melee attack and the subsequent Unravel damage, especially if you hit a large group of enemies with the attack. Onto the aspects. Firstly, the Ascension aspect will allow you to use your air move ability while airborne, consuming your class ability's charge to send you twirling into the air with an arc staff. This attack will deal damage and apply the Jolt debuff to any enemy within a 10-meter circular radius of you, along with instantly amplifying you and any allies within that same 10-meter radius. Additionally, Ascension comes with 3 fragment slots. Ascension is brought because of its interaction with Gifted Conviction and is non-substitutable for that reason. Furthermore, Ascension is just a fun ability to use, and with the high uptime of the class ability, you'll be able to use it incredibly often to clear adds and deal high amounts of damage to mages and elites. Lastly, Ascension's 3 fragment slots make it fantastic for build crafting. The second aspect, Gunpowder Gamble, will cause any solar kills with elemental debuff damage, or ability and super kills to charge up an improvised solar explosive grenade. This special grenade will explode 3 seconds after you throw it, but can also be shot out of midair or while attached to surfaces or enemies to detonate it early. When it detonates, whether by timer or by having been shot, it'll simply cause an ignition at its detonation location, dealing significant damage to any enemies within 10 meters of the explosion with no damage falloff. After using your Gunpowder Gamble's grenade, the aspect itself will go in a 6-second cooldown, during which the special grenade can't be charged. Lastly, Gunpowder Gamble comes with 3 fragment slots. Gunpowder Gamble is a fantastic help for this build. Not only will it clear groups of adds incredibly effectively and provide a source of high burst damage against mages and elites, it will also grant you increased super energy thanks to the Ashes to Assets mod on your helmet, as well as healing you via the Facet of Mending Fragment and generating an Orb of Power thanks to the heavy-handed mods in your arms. Gunpowder Gamble will charge almost every time you use your Ascension ability, and when it doesn't, your grapple melee attack and any weapons you have that apply the Jolt debuff will work to charge it quickly as well. This means you'll have Gunpowder Gamble while your class ability is on cooldown, leading to a loop between your Ascension ability and the Gunpowder Gamble grenade. This loop basically means you can clear large groups of adds all the time and will be granted super energy and orbs of power because of it. Lastly, its 3 fragment slots are incredibly helpful for build crafting, as this build makes use of all 6 fragment slots well. Speaking of the fragments, the first one to run is Facet of Awakening. Facet of Awakening will cause the rapid defeat of enemies with any one specific damage type to create an elemental pickup that matches that damage type. Facet of Awakening does come with a 5-second cooldown between generating the same elemental pickup, meaning you'll only be able to generate one of the same elemental pickup every 5 seconds. Furthermore, kills with that same element while this cooldown is active do not count towards generating the next elemental pickup. Lastly, Facet of Awakening comes with a 10-point boost to your Resilience stat. Facet of Awakening will be able to generate almost every subclass pickup with this build except for Void Breaches. It can generate Ionic Traces with your Ascension ability and your Arc weapons, Fire Sprites with the Gunpowder Gamble grenade, Stasis Shards with your Withering Blade melee, as well as Tangles with the Grapple Grenade's melee attack. Ionic Traces are the most important part of Facet of Awakening, however. Upon collecting an Ionic Trace, you'll be granted ability energy for all 3 of your abilities. The most important ability to regenerate is your Marksman's Dodge class ability, and upon collecting an Ionic Trace, you'll be granted 6% energy for your Marksman's Dodge. I'll talk more about the mobility stat and how this build regenerates the class ability in more detail when I go over the armor stats, so I'll avoid doing that here and instead move on to the next fragment. The second fragment, Facet of Balance, will grant you 8% Withering Blade energy upon getting 3 rapid light damage kills, and 8.5% Grapple Grenade energy upon getting 3 rapid darkness damage kills. Facet of Balance has no intrinsic cooldown, meaning the more quickly you get kills, the more ability energy you'll be able to generate. Facet of Balance will be most helpful for regenerating your Withering Blade melee, as you'll be getting rapid light damage kills significantly more often than you'll be getting rapid darkness damage kills. Facetive Balance is simply brought to increase your slow applying potential via the Withering Blade melee, but it will refund a slight amount of grapple grenade energy if you get 3 kills with the grapple melee itself, so it can help the grapple's uptime slightly as well. Third for Fragment is Facetive Courage. Facetive Courage will cause all of your light damage abilities to deal 10% more damage to enemies afflicted with any Darkness debuff. Darkness debuffs include Stasis Slow and Freeze, as well as Strand Sever, Suspend, and Unravel. Facetive Courage also comes with a 10-point boost to your Discipline stat. Facetive Courage is brought to increase your Ascension's damage against Majors and Elites first, but will also allow your Golden Gun to deal more damage to bosses that have those debuffs applied to them. This build can apply both the Stasis Slow and Freeze debuffs via the Withering Blade melee, although it is a waste to freeze enemies with Withering Blade as that requires both melee charges and has a shorter duration than the Slow debuff does. For Strand debuffs, the Unravel debuff can be applied to enemies via the Grapple melee, meaning you can make use of Unravel if you don't have any Withering Blade charges. The fourth fragment, Facet of Hope, will grant you a 60% boost to your class ability's recharge rate while you have any elemental buff applied to you. As long as you have any one of these elemental buffs, you'll be granted Facet of Hope's 60% increased class ability generation. Facet of Hope is brought specifically to increase your Marksman's Dodge's uptime, in turn increasing your Ascension uptime. This build can get a few light buffs. Amplified will be the one you'll be getting most of the time, but you'll also be granted Restoration thanks to Orbs of Power and the Facet of Purpose fragment. As for Amplified, you'll be instantly amplified for 15 seconds every time you use your Ascension ability, along with being granted the buff for simply getting rapid arc kills. Again, I'll talk more about the class abilities regeneration when I go over the mobility stat later in the video, but Facet of Hope's 60% recharge rate is great for Ascension's uptime. The fifth fragment, Facet of Mending, will grant you the Cure buff instantly upon defeating any enemy with your grenade ability, which will heal you instantly for 60 health. If you defeat an enemy with your Transcendence grenade, you'll instead be granted the Cure ×2 buff, healing you instantly for 120 health. The Cure buff itself has an intrinsic 1-second cooldown, and additional activations of the Cure buff during this cooldown won't grant you more health. This means you'll only be able to get Facet of Mending's healing once per use of your grenade ability. Facet of Mending is a fantastic survivability mod for this build, as it works with both your grapple melee ability and your gunpowder gamble grenade, meaning kills with both will cure you. Furthermore, with the 2 firepower mods in your arms, both your grapple melee and your gunpowder gamble grenade will create orbs of power, which will also heal you via recuperation and grant you restoration when they're collected. This just makes grenade kills even better for healing, and you'll have gunpowder gamble specifically active almost every time it's off cooldown, meaning you'll have access to its healing potential often. Sixth and finally for fragments is Facet of Purpose. Facet of Purpose will cause the collection of any orb of power to instantly grant you a super affinity matching buff for a duration of time specific to the buff itself. Facet of Purpose also comes with a 10-point deficit to your recovery stat. As this build uses the Golden Gun Marksman Super, collecting any orb of power will grant you the Restoration ×1 buff for 5 seconds instantly. Collecting further orbs of power can't extend the duration past 5 seconds, but it will refresh its duration to 5 seconds. Restoration ×1 will cause you to regenerate 35 health per second for the buff's duration, and the health regeneration can't be interrupted by taking damage. This is fantastic for survivability and will supplement the healing granted by the Recuperation mod and Facet of Mending fantastically. Facet of Purpose is also the only reason the Golden Gun is chosen as the super, as Restoration is important for this build's survivability when solo or when playing higher difficulty content. With the subclasses set up now detailed, I'll get into describing the artifact mods to run if you're watching this video during Act 1 of episode Revenant. As usual, if there are any Act 2 or 3 mods that benefit this build specifically, I'll leave them in a pinned comment in the comments section when they release, if I remember to. First, for artifact mods, Trace Evidence will cause 2 precision hits against arc debuffed enemies, or 3 rapid kills against arc debuffed enemies to summon an Ionic Trace. Trace Evidence has an intrinsic 4-second cooldown, meaning it can't generate more than 1 Ionic Trace every 4 seconds. Trace Evidence will be procced essentially every time you use your Ascension ability, as it jolts targets it hits. This will generate an Ionic Trace for free every time you cast the ability, which will grant you class ability energy upon collecting it. Furthermore, if you have either Jolting Feedback or Volt Shot on your arc weapon, they'll be able to jolt targets themselves, meaning they can proc Trace Evidence as well to generate even more Ionic Traces. Ionic Traces are most useful for regenerating your class ability, but they do grant ability energy for all 3 of your abilities, so generating them often increases all of your abilities' uptimes. The second artifact mod is Concussive Reload. Concussive Reload will cause any damage dealt with grenade launchers to bosses and champions, as well as the destruction of combatant shields with grenade launchers, to apply the Void Weaken debuff to the enemy damaged for 20 seconds. This Weaken effect is a 15% debuff and will cause the enemy afflicted to take 15% more damage for the Weaken debuff's duration. The Weaken debuff applied by Concussive Reload can't be refreshed while it's active, but it can be instantly reapplied once the 20-second duration has elapsed. Concussive Reload will increase your damage output significantly against bosses and champions, as both Witherhoard and your Bittersweet Grenade Launcher can apply the Weaken debuff. Concussive Reload is effectively free extra damage against bosses and champions so long as you damage them with a grenade launcher before you damage them with anything else, so it's a no-brainer mod to equip. Third, for artifact mods, Conductive Cosmic Crystal will cause your Arc and Void abilities, as well as any weapons you have equipped with the Dark Aether Reaper origin trait, to deal 5% increased damage to enemies afflicted with stasis debuffs. This build can apply stasis debuffs via the Withering Blade melee, meaning both your Ascension ability and your Bittersweet Grenade Launcher will be able to deal 5% more damage to enemies you damage with your Withering Blade. For this reason, it's smart to save Withering Blade to use against enemies with more health like mages and elites, or to simply save both charges for bosses to increase your Bittersweet's total damage potential. The final artifact mod is Kinetic Impacts. Kinetic Impacts will cause rapid hits against one enemy with a heavy grenade launcher to trigger a shockwave beneath the enemy, dealing damage to the enemy and stunning unstoppable champions. If your heavy grenade launcher isn't an adaptive frame grenade launcher, you must also have a breech-loaded special grenade launcher equipped for Kinetic Impacts to be able to be used with that heavy grenade launcher. Adaptive frame heavy grenade launchers don't have this requirement. Kinetic Impacts will simply increase your Bittersweet's damage even more as the shockwave deals damage to the enemy you trigger the shockwave on. Bittersweet is an adaptive frame GL, meaning you don't have to have a special grenade launcher equipped as well, but this build uses Witherhoard anyways, so this requirement doesn't affect the build in a meaningful way. As for the episode Revenant tonic to equip, the diluted or refined Tonic of Amplified Arc should be chosen. While the Tonic of Amplified Arc is active, your primary ammo arc weapons will deal 5% more damage while the amplified buff is active. Furthermore, the refined tonic will boost both the Retinal Burn and Trace Evidence artifact mods. While Trace Evidence is boosted, it will grant you a stack of armor charge instantly upon the collection of any ionic trace with no cooldown. These tonics are chosen specifically for their boost to the Trace Evidence mod. The 5% damage boost for your arc primary weapons is nice, but it's not the main reason the mod is chosen. With the entire subclass setup now detailed, I can get into the armor setup for this build, starting with stat distribution. In the top 3 stat grouping of Mobility, Resilience, and Recovery, spec into Resilience first, with Mobility second and Recovery third. Resilience will be the most important stat in the top 3 grouping. Every tier of Resilience you have will slightly increase your total amount of health, as well as increasing your base overall damage resistance to all incoming damage. At tier 10 Resilience, you have a maximum of 200 health and a significant 30% resistance to all incoming damage. Resilience's damage resistance and increased health is the reason it's the most important stat and will serve to increase your survivability significantly in all difficulties. Second in the top 3 grouping for importance is Mobility. Mobility increases your walking, strafing, and crouching movement speeds as well as your initial jump height. It doesn't affect your sprint speed. Furthermore, it's the Hunter class stat, meaning higher tiers of Mobility will positively affect the cooldown of your dodge. The higher your Mobility is, the faster your dodge will recharge. So here's where I'll be going over the Marksman's dodge and how to maximize its uptime. As you saw earlier in the video, I only have 50 mobility. This is on purpose, as the amplified buff while active grants you 50 points to your mobility stat. This means while I'm amplified, I effectively have 100 mobility and I inherit its maximum class ability cooldown. Furthermore, using Ascension grants the amplified buff for 15 seconds instantly, so you don't have to worry about ensuring it's procced manually. At 100 mobility, the Marksman's dodge is granted 70% additional recharge rate, lowering its base cooldown from 29 seconds to 17 seconds. However, Amplified only lasts 15 seconds, meaning you'll lose out on recharge rate for 2 entire seconds when Amplified runs out. This is where the Facet of Hope fragment comes in. Facet of Hope grants you an additional 60% class ability recharge rate while you have any light buff. As Amplified counts as a light buff, while Amplified is active, not only will you have the extra 50 points in the mobility stat, you'll also have this 60% increased recharge rate for a maximum additional recharge rate of 130% compared to tier 3 mobility. This lowers the base cooldown of the Marksman's dodge from its default of 29 seconds to a swift 12.6 seconds. On top of this, collecting Ionic Traces will grant you 6% class ability energy. Even with 100 points in mobility, this still lowers the cooldown by an entire second, making your Marksman's dodge recharge even faster. Lastly, in the top 3 grouping, Recovery dictates both the delay between taking damage and the start of your health regeneration, as well as the rate at which your health regenerates. Higher tiers of Recovery lower the delay and increase the rate of health regeneration. This build has enough active healing and Orbs of Power and Facet of Mending to not need to spec into Recovery, so you can leave it at its base of tier 3 without any super noticeable penalties to your healing. In the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, spec into Strength and Discipline equally and ignore Intellect altogether. Discipline will dictate the base recharge rate of your grenade ability. Your grenade's base recharge rate as governed by the Discipline stat doesn't affect any active ability energy gains and will only affect the passive recharge rate of the grenade ability itself. Having a higher Discipline stat simply lowers the passive cooldown of your grapple grenade, letting you use it more often for repositioning and applying the Unravel debuff. Strength will dictate the base recharge rate of your melee ability. Your melee's base recharge rate as governed by the strength stat doesn't affect any active ability energy gains and will only affect the passive recharge rate of the melee ability itself. Strength is effectively the same as discipline and will simply lower the cooldown of your Withering Blade melee, letting you use it more often to apply the slow debuff to enemies. Lastly, Intellect will lower the base cooldown of your super. At tier 10 Intellect, your super will passively recharge 31% faster than it would at its base of tier 3. Intellect is entirely unimportant for this build, especially given the fact that this build isn't designed specifically around using the super ability and won't benefit significantly from having it off cooldown more often. With Armour's stat distribution now detailed, I'll get into the Armour's mod setup for this build, starting with the helmet's mods. Firstly, the Arc Siphon mod will cause an Orb of Power to be summoned upon getting 2 rapid arc weapon kills. Orbs of Power will be useful for this build for super energy, armor charge for your weapon surge mods, and healing via the recuperation mod and the Facet of Purpose fragment. Healing is the most important reason to generate Orbs of Power, so having Arc Siphon equipped allows you to summon more of them to keep yourself healthy. Next, the Ashes to Assets mod will grant you an increased amount of super energy when getting kills with your grenade. Ashes to Assets will grant you increased super energy when you get kills with both your grapple melee and your gunpowder gamble ability. However, the super gains when getting grapple melee kills are halved compared to all other grenade kills. This doesn't matter too much, as Ashes to Assets is mostly brought to increase the super energy granted by the gunpowder gamble ability. As Gunpowder Gamble kills enemies you could have killed with your arc weapons to generate Orbs of Power, Ashes to Assets makes up for that somewhat with its increased super energy gains. Onto your arms, the 2 Firepower mods together will generate a potent Orb of Power upon getting a kill with your grenade. Having 2 Firepower mods equipped applies a 5-second cooldown between generating orbs with grenade kills. Similarly to Ashes to Assets, Firepower works with both the grapple melee ability and the Gunpowder Gamble ability. This means, on top of the increased super energy granted by Ashes to Assets, both your grapple melee and Gunpowder Gamble will generate 1 Orb of Power when they get kills, so long as Firepower's 5-second cooldown isn't active. As for your chest pieces mods, simply running whatever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running will suffice. For general low-level content, I usually just run 1 Arc, 1 Solar, and 1 Void resistance mod, but when running higher difficulty content, or any content with a threat modifier, I will change my resistance mods accordingly. In higher difficulty content, it's smart to think of what enemy type you'll be fighting against, as they generally have 1 or 2 main sources of damage. An example is the Scorn. Scorn have significant arc damage sources like Screebs, Stalkers, Arc Chieftains, and Abominations. As that's the case, when going into an activity wherein you'll be fighting Scorn, bring 2 arc resistances and 1 of a separate damage type you know you'll be subject to, generally a Void resistance mod, as the Scorn Raider crossbows can deal a lot of damage very quickly. The same goes for threat modifiers. Run 2 resistance mods that correspond with the activity's threat modifier, and run 1 separate resistance mod of a damage type you know you'll be subject to. For your leg mods, firstly, the 2 arc weapon surge mods together will grant your arc weapons a 17% boost to their damage while you have any stacks of armor charge. This is a 70% increase in damage over just having 1 arc weapon surge mod equipped. The weapon surge mods will help your arc energy weapon to kill enemies on its own, helping you to jolt enemies as well as generate orbs of power more efficiently. Furthermore, it'll help your Bittersweet grenade launcher's damage significantly, making it incredibly potent, especially when combined with the concussive reload artifact mod's weaken debuff application. Next, the recuperation mod will grant you 70 health instantly upon the collection of any orb of power with no cooldown. Recuperation is an incredible survivability mod and will help you to stay alive in all content in the game. As this build's only active health generation that doesn't involve orbs of power is with Facet of Mending and grenade kills, recuperation will make surviving when you don't have a grenade or gunpowder gamble charged much easier. Lastly, for your cloaks mods, the 2 time dilation mods together will cause your decaying armor charge stacks to each last 80% longer. This increases each stack's duration to 18 seconds instead of its base of 10. Having time dilation equipped will simply allow your armor charge stacks to go further, letting you deal 17% more damage with your arc weapons more often. This also allows you more time between collecting orbs of power, giving you more freedom to decide whether an orb is safe to collect or not. Now that I've detailed the Armour's mod setup, I'll get into my recommendations for weapon choice for this build. I'll go over each slot in order, from kinetic to energy and then power, detailing my prescriptive weapon choice and why I've chosen that specific weapon. Once I've done that, I'll then give a few alternative options if you don't have those weapons, don't want to use those weapons, or otherwise want to try something different. In the kinetic slot, I run the Witherhoard Kinetic Exotic Grenade Launcher. Witherhoard is brought for a few reasons. Firstly, it's a grenade launcher, meaning it'll proc the concussive reload artifact mod when damaging bosses and champions to apply the weaken debuff to those enemies. Furthermore, as it's a damage over time weapon, it'll be able to reapply the weaken debuff after its 20-second duration has elapsed instantly, so long as it's damaging the enemy when the debuff runs out. Second, again, it's a damage over time weapon, meaning it makes proccing the Envious Arsenal perk on my Bittersweet grenade launcher easier. Third, when it's damaging an enemy, as it's a kinetic weapon, it'll grant both light and dark transcendence energy, helping to increase both bars evenly. If you don't have Witherhoard, or more importantly, don't have its autoloading holster catalyst completed, there are alternative weapon options you can use, some of which being arguably better for the build than Witherhoard is. The best alternative would be the Lost Signal Stasis Area Denial Frame Grenade Launcher from episode Echoes, as it's effectively a legendary version of Witherhoard. However, Lost Signal is also a stasis weapon, meaning it'll grant you more Dark Transcendence energy when it deals damage than Witherhoard will. The two other weapons I'd recommend using are the Lingering Dread Stasis Grenade Launcher from the Duality Dungeon, with the perk combination of autoloading holster and chill clip, or the Liturgy Stasis Double Fire Grenade Launcher from episode Revenant, with the perk combination of chill clip and Envious Arsenal. Both Lingering Dread and Liturgy with chill clip will apply a stasis debuff to enemies, allowing you to take advantage of both the Facet of Courage fragment and the Conductive Cosmic Crystal artifact mod. Furthermore, both of those rolls allow the weapons to be reloaded automatically, meaning you don't lose out on boss DPS by having to reload them. Overall, the kinetic slot has a couple good options. Use whichever one you have to see which one you like the most, as they all do slightly different things. Onto the energy slot, I use the Vantage Point Arc Pulse Rifle from episode Revenant with the perk combination of Eddy Current and Jolting Feedback. Vantage Point itself isn't necessary, and I use it simply because I have Jolting Feedback on it. Any weapon with either Jolting Feedback or Volt Shot will work in the energy slot, as it's the application of Jolt that makes the weapon. If you don't have Vantage Point with Jolting Feedback, don't want to use a Pulse Rifle, or otherwise want to try other weapons with Jolting Feedback or Volt Shot, there are a few alternative options I can recommend. Those are the Ikelos SMG V3 Arc Submachine Gun from the Season of the Seraph, now acquirable via the Operation Seraph's Shield exotic mission, the Non-Denouement Arc Bow from the Salvation's Edge raid, the Posterity Arc Hand Cannon from the Deepstone Crypt raid, the Prosecutor Arc Auto Rifle from the Prophecy Dungeon, the Shadow Price Arc Auto Rifle from the Nightfall Weapon Pool, and the VS Pyroelectric Propellant Arc Auto Rifle from the Vespers Ruin Dungeon. In the heavy slot, I use the Bittersweet Arc Grenade Launcher from episode Revenant with the perk combination of Bait and Switch and Envious Arsenal. Bittersweet is brought almost exclusively because it's Arc and has a really good perk combination with Bait and Switch and Envious Arsenal. It also has the Dark Aether Reaper origin trait, meaning it can get some use out of the Conductive Cosmic Crystal artifact mod, but that'll be somewhat rare when playing solo. As that's the case, pretty much any DPS rolled grenade launcher can be brought in Bittersweet's place. Do keep in mind, however, if you equip a grenade launcher that isn't Arc, swap the weapon surge mods in your legs to the element that corresponds to your heavy weapon's damage type. Some alternative grenade launchers you can run are the A Cosmic Void Grenade Launcher from the Festival of the Lost event, the Edge Transit Void Grenade Launcher from the classic Onslaught weapon pool, the Caraxes' Distress Strand Grenade Launcher from the Root of Nightmares raid, the Marzilian Sea Solar Grenade Launcher from the World Drop weapon pool, the Typhon GL5 Stasis Grenade Launcher from the World Drop weapon pool, and the Wicked Sister Strand Grenade Launcher from the Vanguard weapon pool. With the entire build now detailed, I'll briefly overview the general playstyle with this build to help you get started with it. Firstly, as the goal is to use Ascension as much as possible, use it whenever you can. If the enemy or enemies you plan to use it on are mages or elites, consider using your Withering Blade on them to slow them before using Ascension. This will allow it to deal more damage thanks to both the Facet of Courage and the Conductive Cosmic Crystal artifact mod. If you don't have a Withering Blade ready to use, you can use your grapple melee to apply the Unravel debuff, but you will forego Conductive Cosmic Crystal's extra 5% Ascension damage when you do. While Ascension is on cooldown, you should have a Gunpowder Gamble to use, which you can either use right away on another group of adds, or save for use when you need healing. Facet of Mending will heal you on grenade kills, and Gunpowder Gamble is essentially a free kill on most red bar enemies in the game, so you can think of it kind of like a bootleg healing grenade. It'll also generate an Orb of Power when it gets a kill, which can be collected for recuperation 70 health and the restoration buff, meaning one Gunpowder Gamble kill can essentially heal you to full health on its own. For damage phases, firstly, use your Kinetic Slot Grenade Launcher to apply the Weaken debuff thanks to the Concussive Reload artifact mod. Then use your Bittersweet Grenade Launcher and dump a full mag into the boss. Using Bittersweet before your Golden Gun ensures you don't run out of armor charge before you can get any damage off with the GL itself. However, if you notice you have plenty of stacks of armor charge, you can use your Golden Gun first. While you're in the Golden Gun super, either apply the slow debuff with your Withering Blade melee or the Unravel debuff with your grapple melee to the boss. This will ensure you get Facet of Courage's 10% increased Golden Gun damage on top of the 15% increased damage thanks to having damaged the boss with a grenade launcher before using the Golden Gun. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or constructive criticisms, please leave them in the comments section. I read all of them and reply to all that I can. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing. Lastly, if you'd like to join our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs, or simply play some Destiny with us, you can learn more about that by joining our Discord server. The link for that is in the description. Again, thank you for watching and have a great day.